Hello and welcome to your weekly briefing for Global Conflict 1. In this video I'll be covering days 151 to 157, and as usual doing my best to document the various political changes that have occurred within that time frame. So I think to lead off I'll be covering a story that likely everybody has heard rumors of at least, and that would be the banning of this infamous troll after doing some strictly illegal activities in the game, namely the doxing of another player. If you have been on the internet for any significant amount of time, I think you will likely be aware that doxing other people is one of the biggest taboos that you can actually engage in. And this individual went ahead and did that to a rather prominent player in House 15. Now, how this controversy became more complex, I think, is the fact that this player who did the doxing, I'm not going to name them because it only adds fuel to the fire. You know, obviously, if you're familiar with it, you know who I'm talking about, but it exists in an abstract, and I think it's perfectly valid to keep it that way. This troll, though, who was doxing a House 15 member, how he got associated with House 10 was through the fact that apparently House 10, they allowed him in on their TeamSpeak along with a couple of other factions, so he sort of knew them via that. And I think another player in House 10 called 13th Warrior, who I hear has been around for quite a while, I've never heard of this player before, they might have sort of sparked the entire incident by creating a castle with some sort of innuendo in regards to a castle design that involved the same prominent House 15 member who got doxed and his relationship with another player in the game. I'm not saying that we have to hold other people responsible for the actions of people that they might have influenced, but I am saying I think this is how, some people could see it being influenced by House 10. Regardless of that, the player themselves is a rogue, and I think what a lot of people want to know is what Firefly will do about this, because obviously you can't have people ruining the game experience for others simply because they're angsty or whatever grudge they are holding against the game. You can't let them take that out on other players because it's ruining the experience for everyone. Well, this player has been banned both in the game and on the forums. Ultimately, he could definitely get into legal trouble if he continues doing trolling on that level. Obviously, doxing players is completely off the table. I'm usually pretty tolerant of the name calling, It's usually all part of the atmosphere of the game, I guess you could say. Between houses that are fighting, you are going to expect a bit of perhaps hostile banter, and for the most part it's in good fun. If you can trash talk your opponent, they do the same to you. Everybody pretty much puts up with it, everybody pretty much engages in it, which is why I don't think it is fair for any house to necessarily get on a high horse, because none of them are condoning the actual doxing, which was definitely out of bounds. But I think this brings us on to a more political discussion that we have to have regarding the House 10 and House 15 conflict, and that is that House 15 is sort of made up of a council of players, and they don't have one central go-to leader, I guess. So unlike House 19, for example, who everybody knows is headed up by Spartak, and whatever Spartak says essentially goes, House 15 is a little bit more complicated. They're a little bit more democratic, so a bit like the real United States, how the government is run. There's probably more freedom within the ranks, but at the same time, it takes forever for it to actually come up with solutions for things. There are no emergency powers for the House General, in other words, and this becomes a problem because they are not doing so well in their war against House 10 and House 11. If we take a look over here at the Middle East, all that land that House 15 previously held is all but been taken over by House 11 and House 1. And the same goes for a lot of territory that they held in Northern Africa. If we take a look at South America, you can see that a lot of the progress that they made has sort of been countered. I think a lot of the inactive players in House 10 have finally been removed. So what you see is a much stronger core now, and they are coming out in force and taking back a lot of these counties that House 15 had previously scored, while at the same time launching their own offensive into the heart of House 15 territory, being the United States of America. And House 15, they don't really know what they're fighting for anymore. What I'm hearing anyway, from a third party who isn't actually at war with House 15, but they aren't House 15 themselves. So I'm hoping the source is pretty much as unbiased as it gets when it comes to sources outside of myself, perhaps, because obviously I don't have a horse in this race, but because each of those houses, the fighting house and the defending house, or however you want to look at that interaction, they're going to both be invested in spinning the narrative in a certain direction. But what I'm hearing anyway is that House 15 is a little bit in question about what their actual goals are in this war. Do they want the Marshal of House 10 thrown out? I don't know, but the interesting thing and how this all ties into the whole troll doxing scandal is that sort of become the rallying cry of all white knights in the game, or at least in House 15, to go and slay those evil misogynists in House 10. And it has sort of given them the will to fight on, I guess, against House 10. It's sort of given them a goal that, House 15, it has the moral superiority now, and they can fight for that. Because that's what a lot of religious wars were fought over, right? One religion believed itself morally superior to the other. Their God was looking down on them and blessing them. And that's probably another direction that I didn't intend to take this in, but I think you get the point of the dynamic that is going on here. Now, that said, there was recently the House 6 faction in Eastern Canada. They joined House 19, and now House 7 is a little bit more worried about what House 19 might have in mind for them. So they have signed some sort of defensive pact with House 15, and at the same time, one of the former factions from House 7 has joined House 15, as you can see here. Ireland is flipped, as well as Newfoundland. And the idea behind this alliance is that the alliance behind House 15 and House 7 is that hopefully it will deter House 19 from attacking House 7. And I guess we'll see how that all pans out. I was sort of hoping that House 7 might get in to the war on either side, but apparently they're not willing or able to commit quite at this point to either side of the conflict, or don't want to. And I also would like to update something that I pointed out in the last video, and that was the fact that there are House 10 parishes in House 7 territory. Now, a player from the faction that is predominantly located here in House 7 territory, but their faction is in House 10, contacted me and told me that yes, this was a former House 7 faction. If you might recall, when House 7 and House 2 were having the whole house split up business, we had the Anthrax Raise group who decided that they really didn't want to be part of that alliance anymore at all. They went ahead and joined House 10, and this was before a war was declared between House 10 and House 15. But that would explain why there are essentially House 10 players in House 7 territory, because if you might recall, last week there was a player who was causing trouble trying to get House 19 to declare war on House 7, saying that House 7 was harboring their enemies, being House 10, in House 7 territory. So in addition to House 15 not really having much of a goal besides the White Knight rallying cry against House 10, House 10, from the same source, was of the opinion that they would like to get out of this war with 15 as fast as possible, obviously to focus on House 19 and the threat they pose. Then at the same time, I got in contact with an officer in the Hulkmaniacs faction, and they told me that they were intent on hunting House 15 down until they left the server. So obviously there was some bad blood between them. If House 10 ultimately does make peace with House 15, we might see this faction split off and perhaps join something like House 11 or whatever House Dave 1 decides to take his crusade to, because as you know right now, Dave 1 left House 1 and he has been continuing his crusade against House 15 in House 11 for the past few weeks. So while House 11 has been fighting House 15, House 15 is interested in sort of getting their somewhat allies in House 19 to declare war on House 11, and this is looking more likely all the time. I think it might actually happen this week, but we'll have to wait and see. What did happen, although I'll tell you, when in regards to House 9, is a lot of House 19 players sort of sent some help down here to northern Mexico, and actually got that flipped from House 9, and interestingly enough, it flipped to House 15. I don't know if they're trying to stir some trouble up there between House 15 and House 9, because currently those two are not at war, but I wouldn't put it past either house. Obviously, one of the interesting things about House 19 is while they are very resilient they are going to really be spreading themselves quite thin unless they recruit more indigenous houses to their alliance. Right now, this is the biggest map that Firefly has ever released, and even a house that is big and has as many wing houses, sister houses, as House 19, they're going to be spreading themselves a little bit thin if they want to hold all of the world, which is why I'm a little bit skeptical of the idea that House 19 could successfully lock down the whole world. But at the same time, I think the world is just so big that it leaves a lot of possibilities open for some sort of rebel uprising, even if they got that big. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, because I think we would all like to see the world a little bit more competitive for at least an entire year, or at least the first age of the world. You know, we have seen a lot of good conflict. I'm not complaining. Compared to Island Warfare, this world has been great. It's been very interesting. Another thing that might make other houses rather reluctant to declare war on House 19 is the fact that House 9 is currently leading in the glory race. This is largely due to House 9 holding a lot of desirable smaller countries in the Middle East and Africa. So, you know, that might be influencing other houses. It would appear on the surface that House 9 is actually winning the glory race. Obviously, that's not going to be quite the case anymore, as they have lost a significant amount of land in the past few weeks fighting House 19. So with the political news out of the way, let's get down to the country changes. As I may have noted, Mexico has flipped from House 9 to House 15 with the help of House 19. Brazil has flipped from House 15 back to House 10. France has finally flipped fully from House 16 to House 19. That was a friendly takeover as far as I'm aware. And Turkey has flipped from House 10 to House 11. Moving in closer to county and province changes, we have, as noted, the Eastern Province of Canada flipping from House 6 to House 19. Newfoundland flipped from House 7 to House 15. Southampton Island flipped from House 17 to House 19. The West Coast in the United States flipped from House 10 back to House 15. The Midwest in the United States flipped from House 15 to House 10. Ecuador flipped from House 10 to House 15. North Argentina flipped from House 15 back to House 10. Bolivia flipped from House 15 back to House 10. Ireland flipped from House 7 to House 15. North England flipped from House 7 to House 15. Moldova flipped from House 10 to House 19. Poland flipped from House 17 to House 8. East Spain flipped from House 10 to House 19. Sicily flipped from House 15 to House 3. Crete flipped from House 15 to House 2. Israel and Palestine flipped from House 10 to House 1. Yemen flipped from House 9 to House 1. Oman flipped from House 9 to House 19. Turkmenistan has flipped from House 9 to House 5. Papua and New Guinea have flipped from House 9 to House 19. Ghana has flipped from House 9 to House 5. Egypt flipped from House 15 to House 11. Somalia flipped from 9 to 19. Kenya flipped from House 9 to House 19. Mauritania flipped from House 15 to House 10. And lastly, Zimbabwe flipped from House 11 to House 15. So that pretty much covers everything I noted in the past week. As always, if you think you have anything to contribute to the report that would enhance its accuracy, please get in contact with me in game. Thank you very much for watching, as always, and I hope to see you next week.
Stronghold Kingdoms. What will you fight for? Play now for free.